Hello, my best students, and welcome again to your channel, Native Flow. Today, we are going to expose one of the biggest lies in the English learning world, a lie that sounds logical, a lie that millions of learners believe, and honestly, a lie that keeps people stuck for years. Maybe you've believed it too. Maybe you're believing it right now. The lie sounds like this. One day, when I know enough English, I will start speaking. At first, that sounds reasonable. You think, I need more vocabulary first. I need more grammar first. I need more confidence first. I need more lessons first. And then, you'll finally start speaking. But here's the problem. That day never comes, because there is always another word to learn. Another grammar rule, another podcast, another video, another textbook, another excuse, and while you're preparing to speak, years pass. Meanwhile, other learners with less vocabulary, less grammar, and less knowledge are speaking confidently, making mistakes, improving rapidly, and becoming fluent. Why? Because they discovered something most learners never understand. Speaking is not the reward for learning English. Speaking is part of learning English. And honestly, this realization changes everything. In this episode, you will discover why so many learners believe this lie, how it secretly destroys speaking confidence, why knowledge alone never creates fluency, what successful learners do differently, and how to finally break free from the trap that keeps millions of people silent. And while listening, you will improve your English naturally through psychology vocabulary, fluency vocabulary, communication vocabulary, listening practice, storytelling, and deep comprehension. So relax. Listen carefully. And let's begin with truth number 1. The day you're waiting for does not exist. Truth number 1. The day you're waiting for does not exist. Let's begin with a difficult truth. The perfect day you're waiting for does not exist. And honestly, this realization can be painful, because many English learners spend years preparing for a future version of themselves. A future version that speaks perfectly. A future version that knows enough vocabulary. A future version that never makes mistakes. A future version that feels completely confident. And they keep telling themselves, when I reach that level, then I'll start speaking. But here's the problem. That level keeps moving. Every time you learn more English, your standards become higher. You learn 500 new words. Now you want 1,000. You learn 1,000. Now you want 2,000. You understand basic conversations. Now you want advanced conversations. You improve your grammar. Now you worry about pronunciation. The goal keeps moving. And honestly, many learners become trapped in endless preparation. Now think about something interesting. Have you ever met someone who speaks English confidently, but makes mistakes? Of course you have. In fact, you've probably met many. Some people speak with grammatical mistakes. Some have strong accents. Some use simple vocabulary. And yet, they communicate effectively. Why? Because communication and perfection are not the same thing. Let me say that again. Communication and perfection are not the same thing. And honestly, many learners confuse the two. They believe fluency means speaking without mistakes, but real fluency means expressing ideas despite mistakes. That's a huge difference. Now imagine a child learning their native language. Do they wait until they know thousands of words before speaking? No. Do they wait until their grammar is perfect? No. Do they wait until they feel confident? Absolutely not. They speak badly. They make mistakes. They sound funny. They get corrected. And gradually, they improve. That's how language learning naturally works. But somehow, many adults expect a completely different process. They expect to become fluent silently. And honestly, that expectation creates frustration. Now, here's another fascinating psychological truth. Confidence rarely comes before action. Confidence usually comes after action. Many learners believe, once I feel confident, I'll speak. But successful learners discover the opposite. Once I start speaking, confidence grows. Think about riding a bicycle, swimming, driving, public speaking. Did confidence appear before practice? No. Practice created confidence. Experience created confidence. Repetition created confidence. Language learning works exactly the same way. Now let's talk about the hidden cost of waiting, because waiting feels safe. When you don't speak, you don't make mistakes. When you don't speak, nobody can correct you. When you don't speak, your English remains protected inside your mind. But there's a problem. Growth also stops, because speaking reveals weaknesses, and weaknesses reveal what needs improvement. Without speaking, you never discover the gaps. You never train your mouth. You never develop fluency. You never build speaking confidence. Now, here's something that surprises many learners. The difference between an intermediate learner and an advanced speaker is often not knowledge, it's tolerance for mistakes. Advanced speakers continue communicating even when they make errors. Beginners often stop communicating because of errors. That's a profound difference. Now imagine two learners. The first learner studies English for 3 years, reads books, watches videos, learns grammar, but rarely speaks. The second learner studies the same material, but also speaks regularly, makes mistakes, feels embarrassed sometimes, gets corrected, keeps going. Who becomes fluent faster? Almost always the second learner. Not because they are smarter, but because they practice the actual skill they want to develop. Now here's the biggest truth of all. You don't become ready by waiting. You become ready by doing. The future version of you who speaks English confidently is created through speaking, not through postponing speaking. And honestly, this is the lie that keeps millions of learners trapped. They keep waiting for readiness, while readiness is waiting for them to begin. So from today, stop asking, when will I be ready to speak? Start asking, how can I speak a little more today? Because fluency is not built in the future. It's built in the conversations you have right now. Truth number 2. Why learning more English does not automatically improve your speaking. Now let's talk about another truth that surprises many learners. Learning English and speaking English are not exactly the same skill. And honestly, this is where many people get stuck, because they assume that if they keep learning, speaking will automatically happen. But that's not how skills work. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine someone spends 5 years reading books about football. They watch football matches every week. They study tactics. They memorize rules. They know every famous player. Now imagine asking them to play a real match. Would all that knowledge automatically make them a great player? Of course not, because knowledge and performance are different things. And honestly, English works exactly the same way. Many learners become experts at learning English, but they never become experts at speaking English. Now think about your own experience. How many times have you understood a word while listening, but couldn't remember it while speaking? How many times have you understood an entire conversation, but struggled to answer a simple question? How many times have you known exactly what you wanted to say, but couldn't say it fast enough? That's because understanding and producing language use different processes inside the brain. Understanding is recognition, speaking is retrieval, and retrieval requires practice, lots of practice. Now, here's something fascinating. Your brain stores passive vocabulary and active vocabulary separately. Passive vocabulary includes words you recognize, you hear them, you read them, you understand them. Active vocabulary includes words you can use immediately while speaking. And honestly, most learners have a huge gap between the two. They may recognize 5,000 words, but actively use only 1,000, maybe less. That's why they often say, "I know this word, but I can't remember it when I need it." The word exists in the brain, but it hasn't been trained for real-time communication. Now imagine a professional pianist. Do they become great by reading about music? No. They become great by touching the keys thousands of times. The fingers learn, the brain adapts, the movements become automatic. Speaking works similarly. Your mouth must learn. Your brain must adapt. Your reactions must become faster. And honestly, that only happens through speaking. Now let's talk about another mistake. Many learners consume English all day. Videos, podcasts, movies, lessons, books. And these things are wonderful. They're important. They're valuable. But they are only half the equation. Imagine going to a gym and watching other people exercise every day. You learn techniques, you understand exercises, you know what to do, but you never lift the weights yourself. Would your muscles grow? Of course not, because observation is not action. And honestly, many learners accidentally turn English into a spectator sport. They watch, they listen, they admire fluent speakers, but they rarely participate. Now here's another psychological trap. Learning feels productive. Speaking feels risky. Think about that. Watching a lesson feels comfortable. Speaking feels uncomfortable. Watching a video feels safe. Speaking creates uncertainty. Listening silently protects your ego. Speaking exposes your mistakes. And honestly, that's why many people unconsciously choose learning over speaking. Not because it's more effective, but because it feels safer. Now here's the irony. The activity that feels safest often creates the slowest progress, and the activity that feels uncomfortable often creates the fastest progress. That's true for fitness, business, relationships, and language learning. Growth often hides inside discomfort. Now let's imagine two learners again. Learner A studies English for 1 hour every day. Learner B studies for 45 minutes and speaks for 15 minutes. After 1 year, who do you think becomes the stronger communicator? Usually learner B, not because they studied more, but because they practiced communication itself. Now here's something powerful. Speaking is not a test of your English. Speaking is training for your English. Many learners treat every conversation like an exam. They worry about mistakes, judgment, embarrassment, perfection. But successful learners treat conversations differently. They treat them like practice. Every mistake becomes useful information. Every awkward sentence becomes experience. Every conversation becomes training. And honestly, that mindset changes everything. Now, before we finish this truth, I want you to remember something important. Knowledge is necessary. But knowledge alone is not enough. You don't become a speaker by learning about speaking. You become a speaker by speaking, and the longer you wait to practice, the longer fluency waits for you, because English is not just something you study, it's something you do. Truth number 3, the real reason. Most learners are afraid to speak. Now let's talk about the real problem, because honestly, most English learners do not struggle because of grammar. They do not struggle because of vocabulary. And they do not struggle because they are bad at languages. The real problem is fear, but not the kind of fear most people think. Because when learners say, "I'm afraid to speak English," they're usually not afraid of English itself. They're afraid of what speaking English might reveal. Now think about this carefully. What happens when you speak? People hear you. People can judge you. People can notice mistakes. People can compare you to others. And honestly, that's what scares many learners, not the language, the exposure. Now imagine a learner named Sarah. Sarah studies English every day. She understands podcasts. She watches movies. She knows thousands of words. But whenever she has the opportunity to speak, she becomes nervous. Why? Because inside her mind, a conversation is not just a conversation. It's a performance, a test, a judgment. And that's exactly where the problem begins. Now, here's something fascinating about the human brain. Your brain is designed to protect you from social rejection. Thousands of years ago, being rejected by your group could be dangerous. Humans survived in communities. Belonging mattered. Acceptance mattered. And because of that, our brains became highly sensitive to embarrassment. Even today, your brain often treats social mistakes as bigger threats than they really are. That's why saying one incorrect sentence can feel so uncomfortable, not because the mistake matters, but because your brain temporarily interprets it as social danger. Now here's the irony. Most people are not judging you nearly as much as you think. Let me say that again. Most people are not judging you nearly as much as you think. Think about the last time someone spoke your language imperfectly. Did you laugh at them? Did you spend hours thinking about their mistakes? Probably not. You were usually impressed that they were trying. You focused on the message, not the errors. And honestly, most people do exactly the same thing when listening to English learners. Now let's talk about perfectionism. Because perfectionism is often disguised as ambition. Learners say, "I just want to speak correctly." That sounds positive. But sometimes, what they're really saying is, "I don't want to make mistakes." And those are completely different goals. Because the first goal creates growth. The second goal creates silence. Now here's something powerful. Every fluent speaker you've ever admired has made thousands of mistakes. Not dozens, not hundreds. Thousands. They mispronounced words, forgot vocabulary, used incorrect grammar, embarrassed themselves, got corrected, and kept going. The difference is not that they avoided mistakes. The difference is that they survived mistakes. And honestly, that's what builds confidence, not perfection, recovery. Now imagine two learners. The first learner makes 10 mistakes today. The second learner makes 0 mistakes. Which learner improved more? Most people immediately choose the second. But often the opposite is true, because the first learner actually practiced. They experimented. They communicated. They discovered weaknesses. The second learner stayed silent, and silence feels safe, but safety does not create fluency. Now here's another psychological truth. Fear shrinks when you face it, not when you avoid it. Think about public speaking, driving, swimming, meeting new people. The fear usually decreases through experience, not through waiting. Language learning works exactly the same way. The first conversation feels scary. The 10th feels easier. The 50th feels normal. The 100th feels natural. And honestly, confidence grows through evidence. Every conversation gives your brain evidence that you can survive speaking, even imperfect speaking. Now let's talk about identity, because this is deeper than language. Many learners secretly believe, if I make mistakes, people will think I'm unintelligent. But that's not true. Making mistakes in a language says nothing about your intelligence. It simply means you're learning. In fact, the willingness to make mistakes often demonstrates courage, and courage is far more valuable than perfection. Now, here's the biggest truth of all. The goal of speaking is not proving your English. The goal of speaking is improving your English. The moment you understand that, everything changes. Because conversations stop becoming exams. They become training sessions. Mistakes stop becoming failures. They become feedback. And fear begins losing its power. Now, before we finish this truth, I want you to remember something important. Most learners are not trapped by a lack of English. They are trapped by a fear of being imperfect. And the day you stop trying to sound perfect is often the day your real fluency finally begins. Truth number 4. Why successful English learners practice differently than everyone else. Now let's talk about something that completely changes the English journey. Because honestly, successful learners do not necessarily study more. They often study differently. And this surprises many people. Because most learners believe fluency belongs to the people who spend the most hours studying. But when researchers look at skill development, they often find something different. The quality of practice matters more than the quantity of practice. Now think about two learners. Learner A studies English for 3 hours every day. Learner B studies for 1 hour. At first, it seems obvious that learner A should improve faster. But let's look closer. Learner A spends those 3 hours watching lessons passively, reading grammar explanations, taking notes, collecting vocabulary lists, and preparing to speak someday. Learner B spends 1 hour listening actively, speaking aloud, shadowing real English, making mistakes, and using the language. Who improves faster? Often, learner B, because practice is not measured only by time. It's measured by engagement. Now here's something fascinating. Most successful English learners focus heavily on output. Not only input, let's define those words. Input is what you receive. Listening, reading, watching. Output is what you produce. Speaking, writing, expressing ideas. Many learners spend 95% of their time receiving English, very little time producing English. And honestly, that's like learning to play football by only watching matches. Eventually, you have to step onto the field. Now let's talk about a powerful concept: active learning versus passive learning. Passive learning feels comfortable. You watch, you listen, you understand, you feel productive. Active learning feels different. You pause the video, you repeat sentences, you answer questions, you imitate speakers, you speak aloud, you interact with the language. And honestly, this is where real growth happens, because your brain changes more when it participates, not when it observes. Now here's another difference. Successful learners focus on communication. Unsuccessful learners often focus on knowledge. Think about that carefully. One learner asks, "How can I communicate this idea?" The other asks, "How can I avoid making mistakes?" These learners may study the same material, but their results become completely different. Why? Because communication creates fluency. Perfectionism creates hesitation. Now let's talk about children again. Children are terrible perfectionists. They say things incorrectly all the time, but they communicate constantly. And because they communicate constantly, they improve rapidly. Adults often reverse the process. They become obsessed with correctness, and communication slows down. Now, here's another fascinating habit of successful learners. They practice imperfectly. Let me explain. Many learners wait until conditions are ideal. They want the perfect partner, the perfect accent, the perfect vocabulary, the perfect confidence, the perfect environment. Successful learners don't wait. They practice with what they have today, right now, even when it feels awkward, even when it's messy, even when they're not ready. And honestly, that's one reason they improve so quickly. Because action compounds. Waiting does not. Now let's talk about mistakes. Most learners see mistakes as evidence of weakness. Successful learners see mistakes as evidence of practice. Huge difference. Imagine learning basketball. Would missing shots mean you're failing? No. Missing shots means you're training. Speaking mistakes work exactly the same way. Every mistake reveals something useful, something to improve, something to strengthen. And honestly, learners who improve the fastest usually make the most mistakes because they're trying more often. Now, here's another powerful habit. Successful learners create English habits, not English events. Most people treat learning English like an occasional event. A big study session, a burst of motivation, a random weekend project. But successful learners build routines. 15 minutes every day, 20 minutes every day, small actions repeated consistently, because consistency beats intensity. Again and again. Now let's imagine two learners. One studies 5 hours once a week, the other studies 30 minutes every day. Who develops stronger language habits? Usually the second learner, because fluency grows through repetition, not occasional effort. Now here's the biggest lesson. Successful learners stop asking, "How much English do I know?" and start asking, "How much English do I use?" Because knowledge stored inside your brain is valuable, but knowledge used in real life becomes fluency. And fluency is the goal, not information, not preparation, not endless studying, communication. Now, before we finish this truth, I want you to remember something important. The learners who become fluent are rarely the ones waiting for perfect conditions. They're the ones speaking imperfectly while everyone else is still preparing. And honestly, that difference changes everything. Truth number 5, the new belief that can finally make you fluent. Now we've reached the final truth. And honestly, this may be the most important idea in the entire episode. Because fluency is not only about vocabulary, it's not only about grammar, it's not only about pronunciation. Fluency begins with a belief that shapes every action you take. And unfortunately, many learners spend years following the wrong belief. The old belief sounds like this: I need to know more before I speak. It sounds logical, it sounds responsible, it sounds intelligent, but honestly, it creates a dangerous cycle. You study more because you don't feel ready. Then you study more because you still don't feel ready. Then you study even more because your confidence hasn't improved. Years pass, and you're still waiting, still preparing, still postponing, still silent. Now let's replace that belief. The new belief sounds like this: I become fluent by speaking, not before speaking. Read that again, because honestly, that sentence can transform your entire English journey. You become fluent by speaking, not before speaking. Think about how different those two beliefs are. The first belief says, fluency comes first, speaking comes later. The second belief says, speaking comes first, fluency comes later, and only one of them reflects reality. Now imagine two doors. Behind the first door is endless preparation. More videos, more grammar, more vocabulary, more waiting. Behind the second door is imperfect action, conversations, mistakes, practice, growth. Which door leads to fluency? The second one, every single time. Because fluency is not something you earn before speaking. Fluency is something speaking creates. Now here's something fascinating. The most fluent people you admire today were once beginners. Every one of them. At some point, they spoke badly. At some point, they forgot words. At some point, they felt nervous. At some point, they sounded awkward. The difference is simple. They continued anyway, while others waited. Now let's talk about identity, because this is deeper than English. Many learners see themselves as people who are learning English. Successful learners often see themselves differently. They see themselves as people who use English. Notice the difference. One identity focuses on preparation. The other focuses on participation. And honestly, your identity influences your behavior more than you realize. If you believe you're someone who uses English, you naturally look for opportunities to use it. If you believe you're someone who is still preparing, you naturally keep preparing. Now here's another powerful truth. You do not need confidence to begin. You need courage. Many people confuse those two things. Confidence says, I know I can do this. Courage says, I don't know if I can do this, but I'll try anyway. And honestly, every fluent speaker began with courage, not confidence. Confidence arrived later, after the conversations, after the mistakes, after the practice. Now let's imagine your future self. The version of you who speaks English naturally. The version of you who can communicate comfortably. The version of you who no longer feels trapped by fear. How does that person become real? Not through waiting, not through perfection, not through endless preparation. That person becomes real through thousands of small moments. One conversation, one sentence, one mistake, one attempt, one day at a time. And honestly, those moments begin now, not next year, not when your vocabulary reaches a certain number, not when your grammar becomes perfect. Now, today, with the English you already have. Now here's the final lesson. The biggest lie English learners believe is this: one day when I know enough English, I will start speaking. But the truth is, one day, because I started speaking, I became fluent. Those two sentences look similar, but they create completely different lives. One creates waiting. The other creates growth. One creates fear. The other creates progress. One creates silence. The other creates fluency. Now, before we finish this episode, I want you to make a decision. Not a promise, not a dream, a decision. The decision to stop treating speaking as a future reward and start treating speaking as today's practice. Because your fluency is not hiding in another grammar book, it's not hiding in another vocabulary list. It's waiting inside the conversations you haven't had yet. Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to Native Flow for more deep English learning podcasts about fluency, psychology, communication, confidence, and personal growth. Keep learning, keep speaking, and remember, the day you're waiting for does not exist, but the day you start speaking, that can be today.